So welcome everyone to the quarterly PatternFly. Oh, can you guys hear me? Network issues. Meeting. It's been a while since we've met. Just want to also make sure that everyone knows that we do have community meetings within the smaller communities. So there's various communities with Angular, patternfly, patternfly-ng, as well as patternfly-react. So wanted to make you guys aware of that, and that is posted on our mailing list when those things are upcoming as well. Green. Today's agenda, we will get an accessibility update, as well as have some developers who have gone through the process of migrating Angular Patternfly, which is Angular 1, to either patternfly-ng, which is Angular 4+, or patternfly-react. And so just wanted to have them share their experience there, because this might be a challenge that is upcoming for other devs in this area. We also have an RCUE update, repo team update, so saying what's going on in the various repos, a PatternFly Next quick update, and as well as metrics. Before we get started, a couple of announcements is that thank you to Amy Lowe. We have this PatternFly Library overview page. You can access this. I've linked to it, and we'll share these slides in a bit, but you can access this going to Patternfly and going to overview. It is a table that has a list of all of our patterns on the website, and it will show you whether or not, or where they are implemented at. So you can, so for example, about is implemented in patternfly-core, Angular, patternfly-ng, and React, and it has links out to those showcases. So if I click on the React, I can link out to that storybook implementation there. So a really helpful thing to see, and wanted to make everyone aware of this and as a resource that you can go look at. The other thing is we are doing a survey for determining whether or not we have the best forms of communication. A forum has come up in a number of different spots, and there's varying opinions on it, so we thought it best to do a survey to actually collect the feedback of what people think about doing a Patternfly forum and if it's worth that cost. And so I can post the link in the chat, but also we will send out a email on the mailing list for this as well. And then some recent blogs to be aware of is, ooh, that's no good. Is that we recently, we recently posted an update for the PatternFly roadmap, and so that can be found on our blog, as well as a blog on accessibility. It's in some work that's going on there, and just wanted to make you guys aware of that. Jen will be talking about the accessibility effort a little bit more today, and Andre's sharing a little bit more about the CSS architecture with PatternFly Next. We also have a recording that we can send you to do a deeper dive of the PatternFly Next update, as well as a bi-weekly meeting, or demo rather. Our first one was yesterday, and that will happen every 2 weeks. So that is open, and anyone's welcome to join. If you're interested, just please reach out to me, or even if you just want to say in the Blue Jeans chat that you want added to that meeting invite, you can say it there and I'll make sure you're added. Last announcement is that we have a mailing list. I know many of you know this, but some people don't, and so I'm just making this announcement here. If you're not on it, you can sign up by following this link. Any questions on that so far? All right, so with that, we have the accessibility update. Jen, do you want me to continue sharing, or do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, you can continue sharing.
Okay.
Hey, so we have a proposal for how to handle accessibility starting in PatternFly 3. We'd love to get your feedback on it. We're thinking that we would start on Global Accessibility Awareness Day, which is May 17th. So any new contributions from that day forward, we would like for them to be keyboard accessible. So being able to use standard keys associated with semantic HTML, so like tabbing through the interface, hitting enter, spacebar, things like that to interact with the components. The other thing that we were thinking we could start to incorporate would be following the 5 rules of ARIA. So those are rules that are currently documented, and they're pretty simple and straightforward. So we're hoping that these would be like really easy things to follow to start incorporating into our components. So the first rule of ARIA, if you want to move forward, thank you, is that if you can use a native HTML element, then you should do so. So instead of trying to take a generic HTML element like a div or a span tag and then adding ARIA attributes to it to turn it into something like a button, that's generally not recommended unless there are situations where you have to do that. So situations like the element that you need to use isn't accessible yet, or the element that you need to use cannot be styled the way that you need to style it, or the element that you need to use just doesn't even exist. So in general, if it does exist, like a button or a link, then you should use that HTML element. The second rule of ARIA is to not change native semantics unless you really have to. So the example on the left, you can see that there's a heading level 2, and then it has a role of tab associated with it. An element can only have one role associated with it. So by default, a heading level 2 has the role of heading. And once you add the role of tab, it's no longer considered a heading. So it kind of defeats the purpose of using that H2 element. So if you do happen to have the need for a tab that has a heading as part of it, then the example on the right is an example of how you would do that. You would wrap the heading with an additional div with the role tab. The third rule of ARIA is that all interactive ARIA controls should be usable with the keyboard. So similar to the first thing I mentioned at the beginning is that if you use standard HTML elements, then they're usually keyboard accessible by default. But if you start to add ARIA attributes to make enhanced controls, then you should also test that those are keyboard accessible. Some notes here that if you do implement complex gestures, that you make sure you have a keyboard equivalent for completing that task, and any interactive widgets you create should respond to standard keystrokes. And the fourth rule of ARIA, for this one, the role presentation in ARIA hidden true will essentially hide something from the screen reader. So if something is important like a button, then don't use those attributes on things that someone should be able to access. Usually we use those when we want the screen reader to ignore them, so that it's not adding redundant information to the screen reader user, or if something is not important to a screen reader user, then we would use ARIA hidden and set that to true. The fifth rule of ARIA is that all interactive elements must have an accessible name. The only example they provide on the site for this is the one shown here. So I think if you're using an input field, you should be associating that input field with a label, the label that names that input field. So the example on the right is one way you can do that by using the 4 attributes to identify the input control that's associated with that label. But there are other cases where in PatternFly where we sometimes don't have an accessible name. So if you have a button that's wrapping an icon and that icon itself does not have any text associated with it, that button therefore does not have an accessible name. So starting to understand what are the different elements we provide that where they might not have text associated with them, and learning how that we can start to associate a name for those elements. And those are some examples that we're currently working on documenting that we can share with you. So that's basically it in a nutshell for accessibility in PatternFly 3. I'd love to hear any thoughts or concerns you have about this. And also, if you are interested in participating in PR reviews for accessibility, then let us know. We are happy to have anyone join this effort.
Thanks, Jen. Is there any questions for Jen?
All right, well, feel free to reach out to me either on Slack or email if you want to catch up later. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. All right, next we have migrating from AngularPF to patternfly-ng, and Dave will cover this.
Hello, how you doing? I'm gonna share my screen.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, can everyone see my slide? Silence is agreement.
I can see it.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So my name is Dave Taylor, developer. I was working on, I'm working on OpenShift, and they were looking forward on how to convert from angular-patternfly to either patternfly-ng, which is Angular 5, or patternfly-react, which is React. So I went through a whole task of investigating it. And basically in Angular 5, whoops, didn't mean to do that. In Angular 5, they have an upgrade module, which allows you to upgrade older components to the new Angular, or to downgrade new Angular components to run in Angular 1. So in this diagram, the blue box here is Angular 1, AngularJS, and the red box is Angular 5. And you could see you could take this car component and you can upgrade it to run in the Angular 5 area, or you can downgrade an Angular 5 component to run in Angular 1. So this upgrade component does have some hits. It is basically running the two versions of the framework side by side. So there is reports of like a 20% performance hit because you're running two frameworks side by side. But I included a link. There's a lot of optimization you can do to speed it up. So that's a consideration. So basically, in the considerations doing this, if you're taking an Angular 1 project and you want to go to Angular 5, it is really recommended that you start to adopt TypeScript. I don't think it's an actual requirement, but all the Angular examples and documentation and everything is in TypeScript. So you really should consider moving to TypeScript. And it's not a big issue. At the very smallest level, it could be transparent. You just sort of include TypeScript and it could read any JavaScript file. And then you could slowly add some of the static type checking, which is the power of TypeScript. It's also recommended that you use a module loader like Webpack, because that really, it goes through your dependencies and does some tree shaking, and it doesn't include all the code that you can import. It only includes the ones, all the code from the dependencies. It only includes the code your application actually uses and imports. So you want to use Webpack. The other issue is all your Angular directives, this is Angular 1 directives, need to be converted to Angular 1.5 component structure in order to be upgraded. We'll talk about that a little later. I don't really see a good use case for upgrading, so this might not be an issue, but we'll talk about that in a second. And the other prerequisite is If you're going to Angular, 2+ or Angular 5, you need to check.
Oh, we lost you, Dave.
Lost your audio.
Oh.
That was a quick takeout.
Yeah, weird that it was working.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Can't hear you.
Oh.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Go without the headphones. I don't know what's going on. All right. So what I was saying is let's just go to the recommendations because I know I'm going long on this. Basically, I didn't. So in this picture, the recommendation would be you would slowly take your older AngularJS components and you would do a total convert to Angular 5 and then downgrade them to run in your Angular 1 application. And that's because I don't see, if you were going to upgrade your component to run in Angular 5, there's a lot of scaffolding you have to do. You have to do it in a wrapper. All the events have to have special code. And in the end, if you upgrade your component to Angular 1, you kind of have this Frankenstein, basically, component that can run in Angular 5. But if your end goal is to migrate everything over to Angular 5, having an upgraded component in this state isn't what you're going to want in the end result. So really, the recommendation is you rewrite your component in Angular 5 and you downgrade it to run in your Angular 1 app. And then once everything is upgraded to Angular 5, you can get rid of AngularJS and you'll be happy. And that's about it. That's the recommended path. Basically, convert your components to Angular 5 and then downgrade them to run on AngularJS. And that will give you the most bang for the buck. You don't have to deal with the upgrade and this hybrid thing. I think that's the quickest path to upgrade to Angular 5. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Hope I didn't lose everyone.
Thanks, Dave. All right, next we will have John and Joe cover what it might look like to upgrade to PatternFly React. Do you guys want to share your screen?
Yeah, can you see my screen? Probably should have had the slide queued up.
No worries.
Okay. All right, so I'm John Jackson. I work with Dave along with Dave on OpenShift. So along with researching migrating from AngularJS to Angular 2+, we were also looking at React. So basically, a lot of the prerequisites for React are going to be similar to going from older Angular to new Angular. One difference would probably be migrating to Redux first if you plan on using Redux in your React app. It'll just make the transition easier, and you can use the Redux methodology in Angular. So, and then the other thing is you will need an extra dependency to basically consume React components as Angular directives or components in your Angular app. Basically, it's just a package that will allow you to load a React component as an Angular module in your app. The general strategy is to start from the bottom up. You just want to start with like your smallest components that don't have any subcomponents, I guess. So leaves of your component tree. So you start with those, and then once you get all of those converted, then you move up a level basically, and you start converting your container level components that have now have child React components. And you basically just keep moving up that tree until you have converted all of your components, and you're basically at the page level. And then once you've converted your page level components, then you move on to converting your routing and your index file, and that's where you're at the point of removing Angular. So this is just obviously a very high level strategic approach. This doesn't get down into like the nitty gritty of the details. We actually haven't done any of this yet, so I'm sure there's a lot more to it. Some gotchas that we do know up front. You don't have the Angular dependency injection available anymore, so you have to manually require your dependencies in your components. And then once you get up to container level components, you'll run into situations where you need to share Angular dependency. So your container component is an Angular component, and then your children are React components, and you need to be able to share dependencies from that Angular component to the child React component. And there are strategies for doing that as well. And then data binding works differently in React than in Angular. Angular, you can have one-way or two-way data binding, whereas in React, it's just one-way. So if you have Angular components that have two-way binding, then you have to come up with a strategy for either converting your component that uses two-way binding into one-way binding before you translate it into React, or you have to like wrap your React component with another Angular component around it that does the two-way binding for you, basically. So those are some of the things that you'll definitely run into, and I'm sure there's a lot more, but we like I said, we haven't actually started doing this. So that's about all I've got for that. Joe, I'm going to hand it over to Joe for covering the testing stuff.
Sure. So my name is Joe Kayani. I work with John and Dave on OpenShift. So we actually did create a small stateless React component within the catalog repo of OpenShift, and did some unit testing on that as well. So unit testing in a mixed environment can often be accomplished just in tandem with using the existing infrastructure and the addition of a React-based test library like Jest or Enzyme. We used Karma was the existing test infrastructure. So we installed Enzyme on top of that, imported Enzyme and React into the test spec, and created the unit test, adding it into the existing test locations. And Karma ran the React tests alongside the Angular tests. So it worked out pretty well, because as you gradually build your React component library, as John said, from like stateless components to pages to routes, you can also increase your unit testing component by component in the same test infrastructure. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yep.
All right, is there any questions there? All right, let's see what's next. before I start sharing my screen again. We have an RCUE update that Adam is going to go over. Adam, do you want me to share my screen, or do you got it?
Okay, there we go. You can share your screen.
Okay.
Okay. So for the RCUE update, there were two things on the RCUE GitHub website, which is at that address there, that were broken. There was a broken screenshot where it just showed an empty, broken image tag with some alt text. So that was updated to be the proper image. It actually was on the site. The link was just broken for some reason, so that was fixed. And now the RCUE login pattern references the proper patternfly login pattern and information on the patternfly site. What happened was when this page was first created, it used patternfly had a different routing system, and it was never updated when patternfly's routing was changed. So I just went in and changed the routing to be to go to the proper location. So now both of those work. So if you ever used RCUE and those two things never worked, now they do. It's live and functioning. Also, as part of the RCUE updates, I worked with Kyle to update the login navbar and about modal off of the designs that he has. So those that are currently in a pull request, which leads into the second or the last bulleted item here. As part of the RCUE going forward, the idea is that RCUE will now be part of patternfly-core as a theme. So if you want to use the RCUE system, which is really just different colors and some different spacings, what you would do is you would pull down patternfly-core, just like everything else, and then there will be an rcu.css file right inside of there. It'll have all the references. So going forward, when we need to update designs or update anything in RCUE, update patterns, if we want to do color changes or anything, it would just all be done in core, so we wouldn't have to worry about the system trying to automatically update a repo that we have control over, but nothing's done inside of there, or having conflicts take place, or if builds break or anything, we just have to look in one place. So it simplifies everything and makes it a lot easier to maintain, and there's a lot less hunting around trying to figure out where things are and why things are broken, which is one of the reasons it took so long to update the links and the broken images on the RCUE site, and to get these designs updated. So the PR is in progress if anybody wants to look at it. I didn't put a link in here, but it's one of the top, one of the most recent PRs in Patternfly. So if you want to go look at that, feel free, and you can see everything that's there.
All right.
That's it.
Thank you, Adam. Any questions on that one?
The only question is, will we be updating the branding page of that RCUE website or portal, whatever you call it, to reflect the latest elements? Because it doesn't seem to be updated still.
Yeah, we need to decide what to do with that website, but I'm not under the impression that it's frequently visited. So I think that there's maybe a way that we can fold that into the Patternfly website instead of having a separate entity for it. But we need to figure out exactly what that solution is first.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for reporting that, Ju. All right, Patternfly Repo team updates. We first have Patternfly Design. So Matt Carano.
Yeah, I'm going to actually grab the screen share.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's see. Okay. All right. So shifting over to the design side, there's a couple things I wanted to talk about that have been updated recently. The first is the login pages. So we probably about 4 months ago now, we did a major overhaul to our login page. And a couple of the things that were driving this were, one, we wanted to update this to, one, just be more consistent with what the prevailing style login is, which really works much better for responsive applications, where this will compress to mobile size pretty readily because it's already in that sort of vertical card format. And also we wanted to allow some flexibility for different styles, different approaches to login, with the recognition that login is no longer just a monolithic thing where you enter a user ID and a password. So this is our new basic login page with the single card in the middle. This is the most standard basic case with just the fields for username and password. And we can also now include social logins for any projects or applications that require the social login option. So you'll see these social login buttons in a separate column on the right-hand side. We also introduced a single sign-on login screen, which can be seen here. And all these are linked in the slides if you want to go in and look at them more closely on our website. And then
Matt, before you leave this page, I might be interrupting too soon. But if you go back to the login basic, I just wanted to point out to everyone one of the new things. If you go to the code tab, one of the newest things that has been added to patternfly.org is dev notes. And so we don't see this across all the patterns yet, but we've started to add this with new patterns, and with the just want to make everyone aware of that.
Yep, that's definitely good to note for the developers online that you can find this here. Also, while we're on that subject of, I don't know, in this page, let me just go to something else that has.
I think the about modal is a good one.
These links up at the top, we have now linked any of the JavaScript implementations for any of our patterns to the code page. So within the code page, you'll see if there's a core implementation, you'll see those core examples, but then you can also link off to the JavaScript showcase where that, in this case, the Angular component could be found. So that's also something that was added probably in the last 6 months. Okay. So continuing with the login options. So the third one is a multi-factor login, which is available. So this supports standard multi-factor login approach where the user can enter initially their username and then go to a second screen where they can enter their password or use other methods for validation. So two-factor validation with using, in this case, an authenticator code or SMS code, etc. So overall, this provides much greater flexibility for different approaches to login within PatternFly. Any questions on that before I move on to some other things? Okay. We also have made significant revisions to our filter pattern. So this filter page on the website has been completely rewritten. And part of this approach is to allow, again, more flexibility. So we still support the standard filter, which is now being called a text box filter, which is what has been in PatternFly for a while, but we also introduced this checkbox filter, which is allows you to select from a number of facets or attributes values to apply multiple filters to your data set. And the next thing I wanted to point out were some changes to form labeling. This, I'm showing you the test page for this. These changes have been finalized within the last week. The documentation on the website has not yet been updated, but we just need to work out some issues with merging that PR, and that should happen this week. But just to kind of highlight the changes we've made, formerly we had both the required field, the red asterisk, and the info tip on the right-hand side of a label. And that caused some conflicts when both of those needed to exist at the same time. So we've reworked the way we label form fields a bit. So you'll see some of the examples here where the required field asterisk now falls on the left-hand side of the label, and then that leaves the right-hand side available for the info tip. So you can see here examples where we have both of those coexisting together. The other change we made is formerly the info tip icon was showing up in blue, and we felt like when you had a lot of these on the page, it really drew too much attention to them. So we've changed the static color for those icons to dark gray. You can see as you hover over them, they show the blue highlight hover color. And you can see here how those examples for left-aligned labels, top-aligned labels, and I have right-aligned labels here somewhere. It is the right-aligned labels with the required field and the info tip. Any questions on that? Okay, so I think I have one more thing to show, which is the introduction of the context selector as a new pattern. And this places a context selector menu in the masthead for applications that require that type of navigation for selecting context above the primary navigation. And that's simply just a drop-down menu that has been styled to sit inside the masthead. And I think that's it. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question, Mark.
Yeah, please.
And maybe it's just ignorance on my part, but is there a place where we're tracking the changes of these styles over time? So the change to the login screen, like, you know, some websites you can go and click on the top and it'll say version 1.x point whatever. And also, are these changes being versioned by any chance? Because like I've dealt with some older things, and they've been older designs, and I've been like, oh crap, this is an older design, but I can't find where the older design exists. All I see is the new design that's been changed. So like, is there any way to see the older stuff, or to know what version of the newer stuff, or to know what's the newest of the newer stuff? Like maybe, I don't know, maybe a card widget hasn't been updated in a long, long time, and it's in the pipeline to update it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good. It's a good question, a valid point. Right now, we don't have any place where we explicitly version these. Maybe it's something for us to consider going forward on within, say, this overview page or something, being able to reflect a version or what's changed recently. But yeah, no, we unfortunately don't have that at present.
Yeah, and so that's right. Like patternfly.org just always shows like the latest change, and that's what you see on the site. Jason brought up a good point that this stuff is all managed and maintained in GitHub. So that has some history, but you're right, we have a total gap in that. I think that the awareness of when something changes, we could improve on that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's certainly a valid question, a valid point for us to consider moving forward. Any other questions?
I was just curious when the context selector pattern or code will get is planned for.
We do have code for it now. So we do have that.
And that's specifically for core.
If you take a look at the code page.
Yeah, I clicked on code and it doesn't do anything.
I think that's in the
up for it, so it should be in there today.
Okay, yeah, I know that's in progress, so that the code does exist, it just hasn't been merged into the website yet.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, anything else? Okay, thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Leslie.
All right, thanks, Matt. And I do just want to give a time check. We have a little over 15 minutes. The next person we have up is Kyle to share about PatternFly Design Kit, and Matt. Kyle, do you want to share your screen?
Yes. All right. So there. All right. So I want to quickly talk about the PatternFly Design Kit. So what we have here is a dedicated repo to the PatternFly Design Kit, and we did that. So let me back up. It's the PatternFly Design Kit consists of a couple sketch files, which is a symbols and a templates library, 2 separate sketch files, as well as a few images and some README files. And they include either release notes or this README that tells you how to set everything up, and it gives an explanation on how to use it. So Matt did a great job of documenting all that. But the goal of this design kit is to utilize Sketch to its full ability with all of the library and symbols features to make it easy for everybody to create a new UI. So I'm going to give a quick demo of that, but we put all this in a separate repo, so that way when you clone it to your desktop, you can continue to pull it down, and then it will swap that file out, and you don't have to manually go and update you don't have to go find the library file again and re-add it. It just keeps updating, which is nice. So I'm going to quickly just show how it works. So we have a template file and a symbols file, and we separated those because that's how Sketch works. So you would start with a template file, and that's going to be like bigger layouts, like a login or a card view or a list view. So I'm going to go to Sketch, and I'm going to go to New from Template, and this would be our template file, the other file we have in that GitHub repo. So we have our template, and you can see here, this is like just a generic layout. And then we have things like logins. We have most of the things you're going to need to get started. We don't have everything yet because we're still on version 1 of this. We just released it, but we're going to add new things in the future. One of the things that Sketch does really well is it allows us to scale. So it's going to mirror a little bit how our login is set up to scale. I mean, it's not perfect, but it does better than any of the other tools we had before. So that's pretty nice. I'm going to show you how then we have card view as well as like a table view, and that's already all set up. All you got to do is go in here and change some names, and then you're done. And it mirrors exactly what we have in our library. And before, we had a lot of Photoshop files and just random files floating around, and none of them were very consistent because we had them over a series of years. And they get out of sync really easily, but this one central library will always be in sync. So you can trust the colors and trust the backgrounds and the sizes and stuff to know that they're accurate. So I'm going to go to this empty page, And really fast, I'm going to go over here and show you that. So here's all of our symbols that we have. I'm going to show you that we have, let's just set up a form really fast. So we're going to go to fields. We have inline field. And I'm just going to place one of the fields. I'm going to make another field and duplicate it, Command D, and then I'm going to place a button. It should be in, no, right here, default button, and then another button, and now we have a form, right? In the future, we'll have forms already set up. But what's great about this is we have a consistent naming structure. So you can see here that we have our status of the field, where it's in error or not. And then we also have a state, so you can see whether it's hovered or clicked. Right here, it's clicked. And then you can just quickly go in here and change the names, and they get updated really fast. So you just go down here and you'd update all of them really quickly. And the same thing goes for the button label, and then you can just resize it, and it will automatically scale to fit. So it works. Most of the symbols work like that. Real easy to use, and it allows you to make something really fast. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions? We also have in the PatternFly Slack, we have a Design Kit channel. If you have questions that you want to ask, you can do it there. That's it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. All right, next up we have Colleen. Will you be presenting the Angular stuff?
Yep.
Awesome.
All right, so just a quick Angular update. A couple things we've implemented recently, something we're calling Eyes on the Core. Really, this is just kind of a weekly review, looking back at any changes or updates that have been made over in terms of the PatternFly core and PatternFly design repos, to see if there's any impact on Angular or any gaps, things we need to address. So just trying to be a little bit more diligent in keeping up with those. And in terms of new functionality or new items added, we added support for less to Sass conversion. So thanks, John. We've enhanced a number of patterns as well as fixed a number of bugs. I listed some of the bigger ones here, but definitely others. So notification door, empty state, table view, wizard, to name a few. And then in terms of new pattern or components added, we've added the filter panel, the modal overlay, and date picker patterns to Angular. So those implementations are up. So thanks to Nicole for her first contributions. And as you guys, you heard from Dave, John, and Joe earlier, they had a number of contributions. So thanks to everyone for contributing both in and outside our community. And last thing, just stay tuned for an upcoming community survey. So we had done a survey a number of months ago now with the Angular community, just trying to get an idea of what folks are considering for the future, whether they're migrating, maybe it's React, maybe it's NG. So just trying to get a feel for what future plans are so we can best support and understand everyone's plans. So stay tuned for that. And that's it for Angular.
Thanks, Colleen. All right, we're getting really down to time, so I'm going to go forward into PatternFly NG. Kat or Dan?
For PatternFly NG, we have a table implementation now using NGX data tables. Thanks, Dan, for this. He put a lot of work in, and there's a lot of capabilities here. I won't read through them, but definitely go check it out. It handles a lot of use cases. We also had an app launcher contribution, and Dan also updated the demo site so that we have clearly separated components, pipes, directives, and services. So it's much easier to kind of look at the information you're looking for within PatternFly NG now. Additionally, Dan also worked to make sure that the ES6 modules can be imported individually. So this means that you can now import just the module and the code for the component that you're looking to bring into your project. Dan, anything I missed?
Yeah, I was just gonna add that with the ESS modules, with this new addition, you don't have, before if you brought in a notification component, you would have to take the C3 dependencies, the NGX data table dependencies. If you're only interested in the notification module, you can just import that, and you don't bring in any of the other dependencies, so it's much smaller, it builds faster. Good thing.
Very good. Thank you, Dan and Kat. All right, patternfly React.
All right, let's see. We've got a ton of new components. There was actually so many we couldn't even list them all. I listed some larger ones there: notification drawer, cards, breadcrumbs, tables galore. That's a technical term. We have basically worked through a lot of smaller contributions, so now people are tackling a lot larger items, and it's awesome. So thank you to all of our contributors. Teamwork makes the dream work. We're keeping it fresh with a React 16.3 upgrade. We've also got some tooling updates. So now we're using Enzyme for testing, and we've incorporated Yarn for package management. Some things we're currently investigating are mono repos and structural patterns. And finally, I'd encourage everyone to show up to our PatternFly React community meeting. We'll be kicking this back off after Summit in May, and we have an agenda already underway and planned. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Roxanne. All right, is there any questions about these various efforts within PatternFly?
Do you mind if I just chime in real quick with one more update about PatternFly, just because it didn't make it into this slide?
Yeah.
So just right before this meeting, we merged the big wizard pattern PR, which has been hanging around for a month, and that is bumping us to version 2.0, which just got released.
Awesome. Thanks. All right, we don't have that much time left. Andres was going to give an update on the PatternFly Next CSS architecture and some direction we have there. This was something that we reviewed in the PatternFly Next demo yesterday, and so I can send out a link to that recording. Once you look at that recording, there's also a survey that you can fill out to give us your feedback so that we can hear from you and what you think about the PatternFly Next direction. Otherwise, I think we will punt on this presentation. Andres, is there anything you wanted to add before I skip over this?
Not really. Like, if anyone wants to probably know more about that after seeing the recording, then they can ping me on Slack and we can chat.
Okay. Yeah, and again, we have a bi-weekly demo for PatternFly Next and sharing everything going on there. So again, if you want to participate in that and view that, just reach out to me. I will add you to the invite. So we do have some PatternFly metrics as well. This is total quarterly contributors. So this is contributors as measured in GitHub. This is across all the different repos. So in our last complete quarter, we saw an increase increase in contributors on GitHub. So that is cool to see that consistently increasing bit by bit. And this is the breakdown of contributors. So as you heard, a lot going on in React, and you can sort of see that spike there. So the yellow line being spike and have a lot of momentum within that space. So it's great to see. We have also included PatternFly Next on here too. So look forward to seeing that as well. And then the PatternFly site continuing to increase in traffic on the website, as well as continuing to increase our published patterns and widgets. So this is a yearly breakdown, and so increasing that, and that's patterns seen on patternfly.org. But yeah, so I think that concludes this meeting. Is there any other questions or comments? All right, yep, we'll have some smaller community meetings coming up that we will send out announcements about that on the mailing list, and look forward to seeing you at the next large community meeting in a few months. Thanks, guys.
Bye. Thanks.